Good morning, everybody. It is good to be back here with Market Connections. As Lisa mentioned, I was with Market Connections a number of years ago. I was a little less gray, a little thinner, and but it's good to be back. See a lot of friendly and familiar faces, some not so friendly and not so familiar faces out there as well, but. All in all, I'm very excited to be here. I'm excited to go through and talk about this. One of my favorite things about research and kind of exposing the research geek in me is really talking about the results and connecting them to what all of you are doing on a day-to-day basis and figuring out really how can the information that we've gathered and worked hard to gather over the last couple weeks can really improve what you're doing and make you more effective in what you're doing every day. So I'm hoping you can take away, if you can take away one thing today, I consider that a success. If it's two things, then we may look into giving you a refund or maybe charging you more. I'm not sure. One way or the other, we'll talk about that. So as Lisa mentioned, this survey started back in 2015. As really a way to start to look at another part of the marketing process that we all had and that we constantly got questions on. It was great to know where I should be advertising, what channels I should be using to go out there, but the question we always got, well, what do I do with it? What's the most effective way to not necessarily raise our awareness, because that's what some of these outlets are really good for, but really connect with what we do and influence the buying process. I mean, all of us, for better or worse, are really judged in the end by the bottom line. How is the work that we're doing affecting the sales and influencing individuals at different parts of the process? We can't get away from that. I don't think we want to get away from that. So what we tried to do here is really drill down on that. First time through 2 years ago, we looked at the content, we looked at those sorts of things and tried to understand it. This year, based on your feedback, we took a next step down in this, narrowed the group of individuals we're talking to really focus in on the technology decision makers and influencers, but also really look at the stages of the buying process that folks are going through. I'll talk about those stages. Everybody's got their own arrangement of stages. Everybody defines them differently, but in general, we find they're falling into three buckets. I'll talk about that in a moment. The other always interesting thing in this is comparing what's wanted out there and what's effective out there and what we're actually doing. You hope that those two things come together, and I think we're going to see some results that many times and most times they do, and I commend you all in making those connections. But there are some areas where some tweaking can occur, and I think none of this is going to be revelatory to you all. You're all professionals. You've been doing this a long time. But what I want you to take away is that fine-tuning and that tweaking of what you can do, and can we be just a little more effective, do more with less. And I know we're all being asked to do more with less as we go along. So to get into the nuts and bolts of it today, we started out by talking to government folks. We talked to individuals involved in the buying process, federal, civilian agencies. I'm not going to bore you to death with numbers. You all are going to be able to download this report afterward, so you don't need to take pictures. Let your hands take a rest in taking as many notes as you want, and as we go through this. So we talk with folks both inside and outside the Beltway. As you can see, a good number of those folks do lie outside the Beltway. Something we always need to be keeping in mind as we go, that despite our sometimes myopic view, not everything is happening here inside the Beltway, or even where we are right now, I think slightly outside the Beltway at this point. As I mentioned, one of the things we were focusing on this year is this buying process. And as we think about the purchase process and individuals in the purchase process, there's a lot of people that can say no along the way when you're trying to get your solutions and your products into this process. A lot of people can say no. We always tend to focus on the one person that can say yes, but you got to keep in mind that it's easy to influence one person. It's a lot more to influence the people who can say no along the way. So we got to stay in front, and we made sure that we talked to those folks that were all the way through. Influencers, folks that are forming the specifications in the RFPs. All these folks could quell and stop the process, but they're all important in influencing till you get to the final end. Who did we talk to among you all? We surveyed the individuals that are like yourself sitting in this room, marketing, communications professionals, folks really who are involved in the creation and dissemination of the content itself. The folks who are creating those white papers, the plans for webinars, the content that sits on your websites, those folks who were really creating and talking about that. And interestingly, they were about half and half of inside and outside the Beltway. So we go to the funnel, the process that I'm talking about. We really narrowed it down into 3 stages. To put them in, there are a lot of stages. I've been through many, more than I care to say, sales process classes that sometimes there's like 20 of these. But in the end, we really boiled it down to determining the needs and specifications of what you want, forming and shaping the RFP, really the request that's coming from the agencies, and then the final decision. They're in those 3 buckets. And I think about this process, and I look at that top of that funnel, and we have needs and specifications, and I look at that and I say, needs and specifications are for 2 very different things. We often get caught up in the idea that specifications mean the nuts and bolts and the real fine line details of what we're all able to offer. But when I think about it, I think of needs and specifications. We're talking about a broader need. Think about the green fields out there, the needs that you didn't even know existed. That's what we're trying to get out to people. I think back to, I attended the Broadcasters Convention, late 90s. I remember walking to a room and there was a presentation that was being done by a guy with this new company called TiVo. Everyone remember TiVo? And I remember sitting and this guy said, yes, we're going to be able to stop and pause live TV. And everybody kind of went, wait, what? Well, why would I even need that? Why, they have commercials. I get up, I leave, I do what I need to during commercials, and I come and sit back down. And I listened to the presentation, and honestly, I'd been working in the television space at the time. I was like, I didn't get it. I walked out of there, I was like, I don't quite get it. How could we be in real time and non-real time at the same time? And it's kind of messing around with your head there. And I remember going home and talking to some folks, and I said, yeah, I saw this presentation. I got a little sticker that had the little TV on it with the antennas. They gave them out. And I said, yeah, this guy said he can pause live TV. And they're like, well, why would I want that? And over time, over the next 6 months, there was an education, not necessarily about, they can hold up to 6 hours of TV, or you can pause it for 30 minutes, or it has a 10 meg drive at that time within the set-top box. They didn't talk about that. They talked about the challenges and issues and created a problem I didn't even know I had at the time. And now, think about it now, how many of you have TV at home that you can pause and come back to? Yeah, I mean, you wouldn't even think, once you have that, then you're like, where has this been all my life? So those are often the times when I think of defining these needs and specifications, I'm thinking about defining the needs and specifications of the problems I don't necessarily know I have yet. And I think those are many of the problems that you're trying to get out and communicate to folks, and the content that you're creating is to help identify and create that need and demand. I mean, Steve Jobs made a lot of money creating demand for problems that we didn't even know we had or wanted at that particular time. So we'll talk about that as we go along as well. So, what do the federal folks value in this buying process? We broke it down into 3 levels. As I said, we start at the top of the funnel. They're looking for a lot of information. They're looking to define their needs. I don't think there's anything that's surprising to many of you out there. They're looking at their research reports. They're looking at white papers. They're looking at the market and collateral. They're looking for sources of information as they go along. They're not looking for detail, but they're looking to try to frame this problem in their head. Tell me a little bit about the environment. Tell me what's going on out there that may be causing me to have, don't necessarily have this problem right now, but you know what? 2-3 years down the road, if I don't act now, I'm gonna have this problem as we go. So they're looking at that top level information. Way down at the bottom, things like product trials and blogs and podcasts, it's not in it yet. They're still trying to think big picture. They're not getting down into those discrete pieces at this point. Next stage, look, now they've been tasked with creating this RFP, an RFI, getting this out there, actually putting a little bit of meat on the bones of what this might be, and they're still looking at the sources of information out there. They're looking at those white papers, those research reports, still gathering big bits of information about the problem, to define the problem. I mean, the best people who are drafting RFPs aren't going out and saying, I want X, Y, and Z. They're going out and saying, I've got X, Y, and Z problem, and I need you to help me address it with the best possible solution you got. So talk about that problem, talk about those, create that demand for that, so they're asking the right questions. Still down at the bottom, blogs, podcasts, infographics, the things that are a little less dense in material, dense in detail as we go along. And I'm going to come back to those. I don't mean to keep harping on blogs here, but I want to come back to that because, you know, all of these things have their place in the process, but the question is, do they have a place in the process of really getting along detailed and deep content as we get along? So last, we're finally to making the final decision. And what are they valuing? Okay, now it's up a little bit. We see some of the things like product demos and trials have now jumped up in the process. I was at a conference earlier this week and heard a procurement person kind of ran procurement for the VA as you're going along, and he said, you know, once I get the RFP, you know, get the responses to the RFP, the folks who are evaluating these, if they come to me with any sort of material from outside that was not specifically in the proposal itself, I'm coming down on them like a ton of bricks. Because we're supposed to just consider what's in the content that's in that proposal. We're not supposed to be looking at, oh, you found this white paper out there, you saw this research report, did you see this? Not supposed to be looking at that. They're centrally focused. So you see things like product demos and trials where they're asking you to come in and do this for them, asking you follow-up questions. Hey, can we look at this in more detail? They're asking you for that stuff as we go along, so you gotta be ready with it. You gotta have it, and it's gotta be clean, and gotta speak to your messages and your strengths as you go. That's the government folks. Let's take a look and see what many of you in this room consider to be the priorities. Did you look at it? Similar things up top. It's not bad. Beginning of the process, white papers, market collateral, research reports. You know, we're all in line. And then our blogs hit. And I was like, really? Blogs? At that, you know, it really goes counter. And as I said, I don't want to talk down things like that because they definitely have a place and a role. But I also want to talk about the effort and time that you are putting into those things. Are you creating completely new content just to sit on a blog, or is it just a byproduct of the research report, the white papers and such? Are you just repurposing? Because if it's repurposing and using those sorts of things, then great. It's of low cost to you, low effort to you. You might as well have it out there because there's still people looking at it. But it's beginning to look at, we all have limited resources. We all have limited people, limited time. So these are the types of things of let's prioritize this during the stages of the process. As we move along, you see the same groupings up top, looking for that content, looking for the detail as we go along. We're still pretty well aligned. Trials down at the very bottom, which is probably appropriate for this stage in the process. Nobody's looking for a product trial when they're forming the RFP. And then lastly, trials jumps back up when they're making the final decision. And I think I just want to reinforce that being ready with those and having well-polished trials, product demonstrations and such, appropriate at this point in time. So that's great. There's a lot of things to chew on there right there. But next, we have these great tools that we're using, but what are the things that folks are looking for in them? You know, what is actually contained within that content? We talked about the how. Now this gets to Lisa's point earlier about the what. So we see the what. What are they looking for? And before everybody gets all uppity here, we see product specifications at the very top. And I know every marketing person in this room is going, oh my God, you tell me that I got to lay out all my product specs in this? It's not what I'm saying. Product specifications mean a lot of different things. Specifying what the need is important out there. Specifying that, you know, these are things that you could be able to do. Not that it's, you know, these are the exact details of the product itself, but this is building that need. When I talked about that, I didn't even know I had that problem. This is the specifications of that problem. You know, how much is this issue costing you? You know, the problem that, you know, how much of the game am I missing because I got up at the commercial and me going to the fridge took me longer than the commercial break? You know, how much of that am I missing? Those are the specifications that can start falling into this. And then as we see, we go further down, to me, the features that they're looking for are starting to build the trust between the government buyer and the contractor themselves. Look at some of these. The data and research to support the content, past performance, content that is not gated. How many of you put your content, white papers and such, up there and ask anybody who comes on there to sign up for it and sign over their name, social security number, mother's maiden name, all those sorts of things on there? They have you fill those things out in order to get them. You know, do you feel like that's a trust relationship? You feel like that, you know, they're worried that they're going to do that download and their phone is going to ring. We've all had that happen. You filled out something on a website and boom, your phone rings as soon as you hit submit. You know, be careful of those. I mean, there's a time and place for it, and your BD staff will cry and yell about this, saying, we need the leads. We want the leads. Like, no, what you need is the trust that you are in this with them, that their problem is your problem, and you need to build that relationship. Third-party content is another piece there. Putting out information that's not just about you. It's about everything, all the different solutions. I'm preaching to the choir to many of you. I see a lot of heads nodding out there. But these are things that we see as we go along, and we're seeing, and then down toward the bottom, you know, content directly from the contractor, you know, those sorts of things that are really branded hard for you as a contractor, that stuff starts to fall down, especially as we move through this process. We'll see that you as contractors now, what did you think was important? What's at the top of your list? Insights from government thought leaders, past performance, you know, some of those are trust builders. And you would think that insights from government thought leaders, you know, would be a great thing. And I question this. I looked at this 3 or 4 times. I was like, I don't get it. Because if we go back a slide, can you go back a slide? Where does government thought leaders fall on that? Down toward the bottom. Insights from government thought leaders down toward the bottom. And then we go to what we're doing. We're like, well, don't they want to hear from themselves? Don't they think they trust somebody else who's doing it? It makes you shake your head. And, you know, a couple things come to mind. And I've heard this from other folks. They're like, well, I don't want to hear what other agencies are doing. I want to hear what are the best practices out there. I could listen to myself talk. You know, is that it? I don't know. I think there's more digging that needs to happen there, but it begins to question some of the assumptions that we basically have. We say, all right, if we want to build the trust with them, we want to make it seem like, get one of their peers to talk to them, or talk about or quote one of their peers. I guess it's a question I pose to you all. I would love to hear from the panel on that a little bit as they're using that and some of their experience in trying to use those folks as well. So you see these gaps as we go in the content features. And really where you see the gaps here are around these trust areas. The big gaps about providing that gateway where you need to sign up to get the content, making sure that you have good content and data to support it, that there's detail and information in there. They feel like they want to get that information during that process. That's where they want. Where we're overstating a little bit is things like the thought leaders, the industry leaders, those sorts of things as we go along. These are where the gaps are. Is it definitely you need to go in and do a wholesale change? No, but I think it's worth a second thought or worth a question of yourself and say, is my mix correct? Can I go through the test of what I have and really understand, and really be most effective in what I'm trying to do? There's a lot of different channels that you all use to get the information out there. We all use it. Now I want to look at the where people are going when they're trying to find this information. And they really fall into two buckets. One is a pulling, where they're trying to pull some information from you. And there's the push, where you're pushing the information out to them. And if you look at this chart, the top are pull. What are they reviewing most frequently? Your website. They're going there. They're looking for that information. It's newsletters that they're signing up for, and they're wanting that information sent to them. It's things where they're going on websites and reading things. It's all of that pull. They're accessing those things. Where it's being pushed for them, all of a sudden now, you know what, I'm not going to those online banner ads. Part of this is what do you admit? And I will say that, and there's more to that as we go a little longer. Who really wants to admit that they've clicked on an online banner ad? That's, you're calling your own sanity into question as you go ahead and do that. So, there's some of that in there. So that's why I don't want to discount that, but don't discount the push versus pull side of things and making sure, what's there. What are you all doing? It's all over the map, and it should be. You're spreading yourself out because there's a lot of different ways. SEO, search engine, optimization in there, very important. We're going to see more of that a little bit later here. Very important making sure your content is coming up in there. Not necessarily your sales message, but your content is. And then you see other things like promoted posts. It's good to see that a very few of you are using no digital advertising whatsoever, very few of you. Because it's important, they're there. All right, so you see where they go, but what's most effective? Tell the difference of what's in the top versus what's in the bottom. For those who are in the back, let me fill you in. The search engines, corporate websites, email, it's those very kind of traditional methods where we think we put the content, they come and get it, we send the content to them. Bottom half of that chart is social media. We have the YouTubes, LinkedIn, SlideShares, Facebooks, Twitters. Again, what's effective? I take this with a grain of salt to some extent, because who wants to admit that Facebook, was an influencer and was an effective way that you went and got content? You go in and your boss asks you, "Hey, where'd you get this?" I got it on Facebook. Where's that going to come from? No, you're going to say, that I went to the website, I did a little homework, I read this white paper that I downloaded from there. So that's one. You'll see it low. We flip to what you all thought was most effective, corporate websites, everything, but look at the social media numbers. Nearly 60% of you, 6 out of 10, YouTube is an effective way to getting this info out there. Facebook, paid ads on Facebook, 45%. So we look at the gaps. If you look at the gaps on the next slide of the differences, where's reality? I'd say reality is probably somewhere in between that. We're all making the investments in doing these advertising and pushing, and we want to think that that's a very effective way to get out there. And I agree, it's effective for certain reasons and certain things. Social media, very effective at raising awareness, of making sure that your name and there's some familiarity with you out there. The deep content, maybe that sits on a web page, maybe that sits in another location and wait to get it. How many of you have been looking at different things in a social media setting and seeing the sidebars that are kind of connected to content that you've seen that you were researching other places? It starts to get blurry in those particular areas. So I would say that it sits somewhere in the middle. All right, now speaking of blurry, and I'm almost done. Speaking of blurry is that we talked about personal devices. This was something that's come up over and over again. Our clients ask us, well, what should we be doing in mobile? And we've done a whole nother study on mobile if you're interested of looking at mobile devices and mobile marketing and that sort of thing and what of how to go about doing that. But we particularly wanted to talk about personal devices with the government employees. Are you using your personal devices? And probably 9 times out of 10, it's their phone, maybe a tablet that they have. Are you using your personal devices to access content from work? And 2/3 of the folks are. They are using their personal devices. And we're like, well, that's interesting. Not necessarily surprising, but interesting. But why are they doing it? And it really fell into 2 camps. One is, I need to access content, and I want to access content when I'm not sitting at my desk. That could be while I'm commuting. That could be while I'm on travel. That could be just after hours and work when I'm sitting at home. Many folks are, government folks are still bound to a heavy desktop computer sitting on the things. They're not able to take their stuffs in and out. Kind of a pain. I got to check my technology in, I got to check my technology out. They're in secure settings, I'm worried about losing it. So they're using their personal devices to access this. The other reason is because it's easier. Often it's easier. There are websites that I can get to on my personal device that I can't get to or are being blocked on my government devices. Or the streaming of video and other audio content and those sorts of things, just such a pain. So much easier to do it on my own device. I don't have all these firewalls and barriers I have to go through. I'm not being throttled for speed in looking at those sorts of things. A little bit easier as we go. I also, so I really want to talk about that commuting group. Most of us here, a lot of us work in the Northern Virginia area, so we're probably driving our cars, for better or worse. They haven't really built it out to make it easier for public transit. But a lot of these folks are working, in a central location, downtown DC, or they're working out on, different bases or locations in other cities around. They're in a commute. DC, hour and a half commute, sitting in a van pool, sitting on the metro, all these sorts of areas. You get in there and you're kind of in a work mode, but you're not really at work. You're kind of in this gray area. You may check Facebook for a little while, and then you may go over and say, oh, let me check my email so that I'm okay when I get in there. Oh, this question here, I go to this link, let me read this a little bit as I go. You've got this kind of gray area where you're not really on personal time, but you're not really on work time yet. These are where they're using their personal devices as we go, and the question is are you present, and is the content you're putting out there working in that gray time zone? Is your content snackable? Is it small enough? Is it easy to access? Those sorts of things. And so we asked you, are you making your content accessible? Like, to what extent do you take into consideration the barriers that these government employees have, whether it be video or whatnot? And many of you are. Plain text emails, they get through spam filters a lot better. The content is mobile friendly, whether it's a mobile page, whether it's mobile first, that's still a question, but it is some mobile friendliness to what you're doing. So you're getting there, and that is a consideration, and it needs to consider and be a consideration as you continue forward, as you go forward in that area. So just to wrap it up, I have a couple things to ask yourself. Ask yourselves, maybe, is probably a better way to do it. And the first one is, do you really know the stage and the person that you're trying to reach at that time, so that you can tailor the content vehicle and the messages within that content to that particular person or that particular stage of the process? And that means being working intimately with the BD and sales staff to know, where are we really in this stage process? What have you heard from the folks? setting up that process early on, because as I said, once that RFP closes, as we all know, lines of communication shut down first. Then all outbound coming in starts to shut down. So being there early and being there to set that process, but also knowing there is still a core group of a quarter to a third of those government employees out there making decisions that still want those product trials and the demonstrations going on. That's a third, so you need to be ready with them, have them polished, have them ready to go. Is your social media effort your end game? Is it the beginning? Is it somewhere in between right now? Decision makers are searching for information. They're looking for that information. So using that as a vehicle to raise the awareness of where things are, where they can find things, using the social media for what it's good for, reaching a lot of people, but also then connecting those individuals to others as they go along, but not forgetting about your website. And I know many of you sit in organizations where the website is commercial. It's a commercial website. And you beg, borrow, and steal time and effort to try to say, can we please customize this a little for public sector? Can we have just a little? Can we, so there are ways to do it, looking at microsites, looking at landing pages, things that kind of operate on the fringes and edges of that still allow that look and feel and the trust of going to the corporate website. And it's not some just free-flowing content that's going on out there. And also being willing to connect to other studies and work, build that trust through the social media to say, hey, have you seen these other studies that may have nothing to do with us, but may be useful for you? I said, do you have a commuters at work strategy? Do you have a way to connect to those people for that hour, 90 minutes, 3 hours, whatever it may be, of individuals when they have this downtime and they haven't completely turned work off yet and completely turned on their personal life yet? They're in that muddy middle time. What's the way that you're able to reach those individuals? Is your content set up in a way that can really be most effective? Short videos, things for them to watch, short reads. Not necessarily blog reads, but kind of rounded reads where this is some referral information where it's from a trusted source. And that gets to my last point, is the building of trust. Trust is the most important thing that you're trying to build between you and your customers, your potential customers, really any of your users out there at the time. And I heard a great phrase that was used at a meeting I was in earlier this week. They talked about those kind of no kidding discussions, where you sit down and somebody and they start talking about, I got this problem. No kidding, I got that problem too. Or no kidding, you have a way that could help us with this particular issue. Way to have that discussion somewhat outside of that formal process. I mean, there's something to be, something about once that formal RFI, RFP process starts that everybody kind of puts up their guards, is where can you start having those kind of conversations with individuals that you're going to want to work with down the road? And are you leveraging the research, leveraging outside sources to help support this? Are you hiding everything behind some registrations where it gives the feeling that, hey, you've got to give me something to get something from me? That's a very transactional relationship, and that's not necessarily the one you want to build with down the road. And really, in the end, your content needs to be focused on building the trust with the customer that you're in it for them and not just for you. I know many of you know that. It's not a surprise, but it just keeps coming up and up again, and I'd be loath not to finish on that point to say really that's where the content and the vehicles that you're using have to go. So with that, we'll have time. We've got some great panelists coming up, and I'm excited to hear from them, their reactions to some of this research, and I will be around after this. As I mentioned, you will be able to download this after the event. The PowerPoint that you see here, you have a little bit of an information sheet that was at all of your tables that gives some of the highlights of this as well. So thank you all very much, and enjoy the rest of the event.